before we move on to the intricacies of the debate itself, let me explain who we are. We're Debate Network Nepal. We are a body who are like the body which is working since the last 5 years to institutionalize the debating movement in Nepal. By debating movement, I mean you may know that, or you may experience debates that were extremely traditional. For example, column thulo ki त्यस्तै खालको debate. But the debate that we promote and institutionalize in Nepal are parliamentary style of debating. And right now, we'll be doing a debate on Asian parliamentary debating format. You can see there are 3 speakers on each side. One side supports the motion or supports the topic, and the other side opposes the motion. And this is done on a parliamentary basis. And this particular format is used in different tournaments all over Asia. So we were informally established in 2013, and we registered ourselves as a social initiative and also profit not distributing company back in 2015. So basically what we do is we teach people how to argue, we teach people how to debate, and we send kids, we send debaters to tournaments all over the country. There's a representation going on as well, and we also organize different tournaments, and we were extremely lucky to have paired up with UNDP 2 years ago in one of our national school tournaments. So thank you very much for that again. Before we move on, I'd like to introduce the debaters of today's debate. You can see on your left side, there's this government side. It's represented by Ms. Ameesha Rayamajhi, Mr. Saugat Pokharel, and Mr. Pragyan Acharya. And on the opposition side, we have Ms. Prajita Budhathoki, Mr. Srijan Poudel, and Pawan Adhikari. So furthermore, see, if you agree with whatever they're saying, we encourage you guys not to clap, but to gently tap the desk in front of you. That's the norm that are seen in debate itself. And also, these guys are professional debaters, so the arguments or the ideas that they will be supporting may or may not be their own personal or the beliefs of their own. So please keep that in mind. Okay. So the topic of today's debate is basically this house believes that. So you may have heard this this weird thing. This house believes that. So what does that mean? So this house basically means the house itself is a parliament. So we're basically doing this on a parliamentary style. That's why we call it this house believes that. And the government side is the side that proposes a motion to be debated upon, right? So the motion is this house believes that environment advocacy groups should prioritize lobbying governments to change environmental policies rather than convincing individuals to take responsibilities of their actions that may be damaging to the environment. So basically this side, the government side, will support for environment advocacy groups to lobby to governments to change environment policies, while the other side opposes the fact and claims that it's better off if environmental advocacy groups convince individuals to make changes in their, let's say, lifestyles, or changes in the activities that they are doing could be harmful to the environment. So that's it. Let's not take more time. And now I'd like to invite the first government speaker to open the debate. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, environmental degradation doesn't go away. The ice caps don't recrystallize, the greenhouse gases don't vanish, deserts don't magically change into budding gardens overnight. In 2018, it was declared that we have 12 years to save the environment from any forms of permanent damage. That's 11 years from today. We think that climate change is a planetary problem that requires planetary solution because it affects you, whoever you are and wherever you come from. So this debate is whether or not we opt into prioritizing government to solve this problem, or be hopeful that a few individuals would change their light bulbs, or a few individuals would go vegetarian. 3 arguments we bring from side proposition. First, that individuals are not at fault and should not be held guilty. Second, that governments are more effective in solving the problems. And third, that governments have an obligation to step up. First, let's talk about how individuals are not at fault and should not be held guilty. Two things to say under this. First, the level of impact that few industries have when it comes to climate change and climate degradation. Since 1988, 100 companies are responsible for 71% of total greenhouse gases emission. Most of them are state-owned. We're talking about companies like Saudi Arabian Oil Company. We're talking about Chinese production houses. 25 of these companies are fossil fuel companies that are responsible for half of the emission that exists today. So yes, individuals can do without plastic or energy. But if our goal is to limit the rise of temperature to 2 degrees Celsius, then it's essential for us to tackle these industries. Second, we think that it's unfair to hold individuals guilty, because individuals are victims of climate change. And this is, in all its forms, it is victim blaming, to say the least. You can't blame a poor Indian farmer for not standing up for climate change. You can't blame a mother of 3 to stand for climate change and get involved in rallies to fight against these corporations. You can't shame the people who can't switch into bicycle because they're born into a system where there's fossil fuels dependency. But more importantly, we think that demanding individual actions as solution to these problems means that there is a large shift of responsibility. That is to say that it can't be recognized as a big problem. And when it's not recognized as a big problem, you don't have any forms of political galvanization. At the same time, when we're talking about international treaties like the Paris Climate Accord, we think that these treaties are largely watered down, where people think that their governments are doing something for them, where people think that the governments are standing up for them. But we think that there's so much more that governments can do. But furthermore, we think that there's only 5 to 10% of individuals who are willing to switch to metal straws, individuals who are willing to take less shower, individuals who are willing to compromise a vacation for the sake of environment, individuals willing to opt into veganism. And we think that in and of itself means that individual actions is minimalistic. Second argument we bring to this debate is that governments are more efficient when it comes to solving environmental problems. That is to say that we've already recognized that individual actions are minimalistic, but only comparative. We think that governments can take various steps. Take an example, we think that there could be various steps. One, regulations. We think that government can regulate things and impose tax in order to regulate these sorts of industries. Second, we think that it can give out pollution permits like it did in United States of America. Third, we think that government can subsidize green or eco-friendly forms of consumption, like it did in Norway when it was when it provided subsidies to consumers of electric vehicles. We think that most importantly, and fourth, that governments can bring parliamentary level changes when it comes to solving environmental issues. Governments can bring policy reforms and policy changes. And we think that after getting these policy changes, we can then lobby for environmental activism in the parliament. That is the moment in time we can lobby to politicians like Bernie Sanders or AOC in order to support deals like the Green Deal or Paris Climate Accord even further. And we think that is absolutely important, because in the modern context, we think that people are more and more willing to buy into right-wing ideologies and sayings that Trump or Bolsonaro stands for, saying that climate change is nothing but a hoax, saying that climate change is nothing but a leftist propaganda. And we think it's important for governments to take these sort of stances in these forms of societies. Third, on a principle level, we think that governments have an obligation to step up, because climate change is a matter of national security. When it comes to floods or hurricanes, people lose their lives, they lose their homes, they lose their families, their property, they lose their everything. We think it's not very different from things like famine or ethnic conflict or war. We think that places like Cancer Alley, where the residents of poor people has literally been turned into a dumping site, we think when these are the contexts that exist today, governments need to protect these individuals. Furthermore, we don't think that climate change has ever been an individual problem. Very much like unemployment or poverty, we think that it has never ever fallen on the shoulders of individuals to solve this problem. We don't have to wait for individuals, each individual in the earth, to be a better person. All we need to do is create a consensus to pressure the government. The weight of our sickly planet is too much for one shoulder to bear, and that is why we propose.
Thank you so much, the first speaker. Let's invite the first speaker from the opposition side. Here.
National security भन्छ one national security को issue भने individuals should act as well किन भन्दा often times we don't हामी robbery गर्दैनौं हैन सबै कुराहरु गर्दैनौं because of threat mic on
it's not okay thanks Hello. Panel, on-side opposition, the reason why the environment is an issue gained so much momentum in recent days is out of the fact that more people now realize the fear of impending doom hovering over our heads. More people realize that we've gone too far in our pursuit of a comfortable life, that there might not be a way to reverse the horrible changes we've caused, right? We believe that when the choices of the people, or when the noise of the people demonstrating on the streets for forcing governments into making environment, that's when we achieve, that's when we design structural change, right? The success of this movement relies can I have another mic? Right. Hello. All right, I'm going to start again, right, from the beginning. Panel, we on-side opposition believe that the reason why environment as an issue has gained so much momentum in recent days is out of the very fact that more people now realize that this fear of impending doom hovering over our heads is an issue that should be discussed, right? We believe that more people now realize that we've gone way too far in our pursuit of living a comfortable life, that the results of our actions might be irreversible, right? We believe that when the noise of people demonstrating on the street, forcing governments to make environment a big deal, that's when we achieve desirable structural change. The success of this movement relies on a clear message, favorable media coverage, a critical man representing a majority of voters, and peaceful protest, right? That's why when Australia sowed $25 million in awareing people of the need to save the environment, it reaps the benefits now as the environment conservation becomes the most important issue of the campaign in 2019, right? The problem that stands, that this notion of lobbying that side government pushes is very unlikely to work, right? For three reasons in particular. First of all, the collective action problem, right? We believe that lobbying can only work in specific countries, right? Because this entire notion of environmental differences exists on a disproportionate scale. That is why we believe that when some countries advocate for environmental advocacy, we believe that other countries lose out on a major manner, right? We believe that lobbying leads to essential policy changes, and these policy changes now become the job of a government, right? That is to say, these policy changes also have economic implications, right? That is why we believe that the government now does not have much of an incentive in order to actually provide for these groups, right? We believe that when the prices of these goods rise, the country becomes less of a competitor in the global market, and that is why governments do not necessarily want to internalize these changes or bring about these policies, right? The second argument is about how most politicians actually look for immediate benefits, right? That is to say, because a person's term only lasts for about 5 years, we believe that these politicians do not necessarily have the incentive to bring about policies that cater to the environment, right? Because these result in future ramifications. Environment is an issue, is only seen in the future. That is why we believe that in order to get these voter bases, if no one's raising voice about the environment or raising concerns about the environment, these politicians do not necessarily need to cater to that voter base, right? But when we aware these individuals and they demand and demonstrate for the need to include environmental policies, that is when there exists a voter base that these politicians will now have to cater to in order to actually actually be elected, right? Third thing is about how there are big corporations like TNCs that we need to tackle before we even go about actually making environmental change a possible thing, right? We believe that we have to fight against industrialists, right, who have huge power and huge lobbying power with the government. That is why we believe that when individuals rise up on the streets and actually force governments into such things, it is much more desirable, right? Because these big firms have a lobbying power with the government in itself, so the government has necessarily no incentive in order to actually bring about further changes, because these big corporations have a big hand in it as well, right? This leads to a few things, right? This leads to politicization of climate change. That is to say, this leads to climate change denial, as we've seen in the world as is, right? This leads to non-immediacy of climate change. That is to say, global leaders can now get away with denying that climate change is in fact real, right? We believe that this is why we conclude that environment becomes a concern when people make it a concern to their governments, right? For the government to care for it, the people need to rise up and demonstrate and put out their voices, right? That is why we believe governments in themselves have no incentive to actually look about for policies for environmental change. Secondly, why do we think that individual responsibility and leads to better actions and more importance of environment, right? For 4 reasons. One, because there's a shift in consumer market. That is to say, people now stop using meat because consuming meat because they realize that is a bad thing to do. They realize that they need to actually contribute to the environment because now they are aware of the impacts of their or the consequences of their actions, right? We believe that more people will stop using plastic, and this encourages awareness of the products you're using, right? We believe that it allows boycotting of various industries that actually try to sell you these products. We also believe that, more importantly, allowing these individuals to be aware of the outcome of their actions is also a very important benefit we add to on our side, right? Second of all, about the democratic influence, right? We believe that when we aware the voter base of all the things that they need to demand in terms of environmental policies, companies are less likely to get away with feeble CSR policies, right? That is to say, companies now have to listen to these people, right? They need to listen to these mass protesters who are actually arguing for strict regulations, right? That is to say, now the TNCs cannot get away with feeble CSR corporations that actually do good only on the surface, right? We believe that this need to cater this booming voter base, therefore allows policy introduction and seeing through the policy that are going to be integrated into society, right? Third, on collective consciousness, right? We believe that recognizing climate change as a crisis and sensationalizing the impacts of this particular thing becomes very important on our world, right? We believe that when individuals take actions to reduce emission, for an instance, it becomes much more beneficial on our side. It creates much huge of an impact on our side. We believe that these people now opt into better alternatives, and we believe that climate change and climate strike and demonstrations as such actually create more of an impact. That is why we believe that what do these demonstrations look like, right? These look like youth in Maithik or Mandala actually arguing about the government recognizing these things, right? We believe such demonstrations are actually important because not only does it provide a message to the government, but these youths who participated in it also get the notion of how their actions are causing the impacts, right? We believe that the rise of veganism movement or the use of metal straws in various countries is actually a show of how individuals can cause about better change, right? But fourthly, on adaptation, right? What happens when we allow governments to deal with big TNCs? They heavily ignore the grassroots levels, right? That is to say, now communities that are going through various changes like floods, as they've argued, are heavily ignored because now these changes need to come up in big scale, right? That is to say, government now needs to deal directly with TNCs or needs to cater for the big problems. That is to say, people living in the riverbanks of Cuyahoga River are not catered to, or people whose villages are being drowning by floods are not catered to. That is why we believe that when individual action happens, we cater to these groups from the grassroots level. That is why when the government cannot reach to these places, the local communities step in, and that is when they actually take the place, right? We believe that conclusion of all of this becomes that it's too late to place blame on everyone, right? We believe that this need to involve actually needs to be something that can cause
cause immediate change in society, right? We believe that we cause better change, and we believe that these corporations also need to be forced into certain instances. That is why we believe that government in themselves have very less incentive to force people to do such things. Forcing people does not work because without understanding the implications of their actions, people are not necessarily going to stop polluting the environment. That is why we believe we take this.
Here, here. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Thank you, first opposition speaker. Before we begin, you may notice that there are like debaters from the opposing half raising questions. These are known as point of information, so they can raise questions between the debate. So let's begin the debate by inviting the second government speaker. Here.
Extremely difficult to translate lobbying into policy that restricts pollution.
Hello, I'm audible.
Because lobbying takes extreme amount of effort.
Panel, what is this debate about? This debate, in its most general sense, is so should we believe 10-year-old girls for not solving the climate change problem that has been going on for the last 100 years, or should we believe that the governments that have been running these institutions and have been sending us into this problem and this void of climate change, which now is turning into a point where it's unsolvable, should they be held responsible? We believe that government should be held responsible for it, and because of that reason, we believe that environmental activist group should lobby against governments to bring governmental changes to bring this change forward. What does this lobbying look like? This does not need to be financial lobbying. It can be political lobbying. That is to say, when environmental activist group, if they have a large voter base, if they have large support in political terms, in economic terms, that means to say them dictating their support towards politicians who will vote and who will bring changes in the government, who will bring changes that allow for better environmental control, for environmental progression, and a world that's more greener and more futuristic. We believe that that kind of environmental lobbying is what we stand for on side government. Why do we believe that that's important? One, because of the political changes that come into force. That is to say, the kind of political changes that come in from governmental changes is large scale in nature. That is to say, the changes occur at all levels and at easily in 1 second. That is, in those points in time, the kind of changes that come from an individualistic level are very less spontaneous and less important than the governmental changes that come into place. Because some people being encouraged to reduce their consumption of petroleum is less worth when you can see that governments can end petroleum consumptions in a day, when they can switch to renewable energy in a day. This kind of changes is important, and so we should be focusing on that. Secondly, in terms of regulation, we believe that the largest companies in the world who are responsible for the most portion of the pollution are not accountable in nature. That is to say, individual rhetoric that individual changes are going to solve environmental problems are never going to cater to these large-scale companies, and because they have an incentive to create environmentally friendly products, because that allows them to make more profit, means that these institutions are going to continue to create problems, and they are going to continue to pollute the environment, and we are going to be held responsible for the pollution that they cause. We believe that they are the population that should be kept into account and into hands reach, and that is only being done through by government control, by regulation, and that's why regulation is important on that level. Secondarily, the standard that it creates. That is to say, there are many environmentally friendly companies in market right now, but the problem why they are not able to find the kind of market and the kind of consumption pattern that is necessary is because of two reasons. One, because of the demand for these goods is very less, and secondly, it's very difficult to produce them. When you create industry standard as environmentally friendly products is when you allow all companies, whoever they are in the market, to produce environmentally friendly goods. When that happens is when environmentally friendly goods become cheaper in nature and they are more accessible to population. That's when individuals get to buy them easily, and then individual choices occur. That's why before you go and say an individual to buy a metal straw, it's better off that you change all the straws in the world through regulation, and that's a better policy on government side, and that's why we stand for that. Yes, sir.
How will using of their convenience if they are not able to recognize the harms of whatever they are consuming.
We don't really believe that recognition of a harm is exclusive to their side of the house. That is to say, we can still cater to individuals to tell them that climate change is bad, but instead of telling them that the solution to climate change is you walking to your office every day or cycling to your office, we'll tell them that government control and telling your politicians that you elect that changing policies is the best way forward is the answer that we would have in that. And in that format, we have awareness, but we have large-scale changes in terms of political and in terms of government levels, which are better off in today's status quo. Secondly, on an individual level, even if they say that catering to individual is okay, we don't believe that that is going to make enough changes because of two reasons. One, because the discussion right now is at refrigerators, at what kind of labels that you buy and how much pollution that those products cause. We believe that taking that discussion from a refrigerator to regulations is what is better off, because individuals, expecting individuals to every day go to a supermarket and see a product and choose whether or not it's environmentally friendly or not and then buy it or not is a worse off decision than changing all of these products into environmentally friendly goods so that people do not have to care whether or not they are damaging the environment, whether or not they are being carbon neutral, when all products are carbon neutral. In that, we tell one, that many of the people do not have access to these resources. That's to say, they tell us that lobbying is not accessible to some parts of the region. In the same status quo, people to find environmentally friendly goods is lesser accessible to individuals. There are lesser companies which produce environmentally friendly goods. There are lesser companies which can create those. And if we are talking about a farmer in India, he's probably not going to find these choices to choose between better environmentally friendly goods, to choose between zero carbon emitting groups. It's better off that when you regulate all of these products and send the goods that are environmentally friendly to an Indian farmer is when he's able to make environmentally friendly better choices easierly. Secondly, is in terms of the kinds of fields that are possible. That is to say, when you create regulations and when you force companies to choose to be environmentally friendly is when innovation comes into play, is when they now have to create cheaper goods to cater to a market that's necessarily for them. They have to now create goods that are environmentally friendly whatsoever. That is the point in time when they create cheaper goods, when environmentally friendly goods become accessible, and that's when you bring large-scale changes. We believe government regulations are better off in doing so. We're proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, second government speaker. Let's invite the second opposition speaker. Here.
Hello, am I audible? Panel, the reality of today's world is pretty different from what side proposition wants to claim. It is not that climate change affects everyone in the same way. It affects elite people in terms of very less amount, and it affects the other people in massive amount. That is the reason why the lobbyists are almost always from this elitist community. That is why they have no incentive to create sustainable development in terms of environmental characteristics in their side of the house. Why do we say it does not work? We say this does not exist in a vacuum. There are fossil fuel companies lobbying as well. They pour in $100 million every year for the same thing that they are doing, and these people cannot compete against these fossil fuel companies because oftentimes these are dictated by our ways of life. That is to mean we use diesel and cars, we depend on it for public transport. We depend on so many of these things. On their side of the house, they want to claim no individuals are responsible. Individual responsibility is not there. Why is that problematic? You tell them that individuals are not responsible and you change their way of living. You tell them you cannot ride diesel cars anymore, you cannot ride petrol cars anymore, but you are not responsible. That is the point in time. Individuals are going to respond in violence of this kind of laws, and that is harmful. Also notice that these fossil fuel companies oftentimes hold a lot of patents for green tech as well. That is to mean they have an incentive not to give in to these kind of desires. They say governments are better able to do whatever they want to propose. We say that governments in democracy speak what people want them to speak. That is to mean the governments are accountable to their present voter base, and climate change, environmental issues are somewhere down the line in the future. Unless people come up and tell them that it is right now we need to create this change, these actions are never going to realize, because government has present incentive for present voter base. Climate change, environmental degradation is a future problem. Next thing to note here is all of this is a collective action problem. That is to mean if I don't want to reduce my climate emission, and if I want to reduce my climate emission, does not matter, because if one country doesn't do it, other country cannot profit, because right now most of the economies are based on fossil fuel companies and that kind of industries. When one company, lobbying is possible, because oftentimes the harms are occurring in one country and other country accrue benefits. That is to mean Maldives got some inside this sea level, while US can by and large stand and be happy. Glaciers melt in Nepal, in Bhutan, but this people in United States does not need to do anything. That is a point in time. Lobbying does not work in specific countries where there is not of their interest. That means when it does not work, these changes are never going to realize. What do we have on our side of the house? We have consciousness rising among people. That is to mean billions of people coming to rally, telling people to make climate change or the environmental degradation their mainstream issue. That is the point in time politicians are involved in discourse of climate change mitigation, not of climate change denial. That is the point in time climate change is problematized as a crisis. Right now we don't care about climate change because it's something that we read about normally. But when we problematize that as a crisis, that a situation that people are going to die, and when people come out in discourse of that kind, that is the point in time governments are forced to make decisions. That is the point in time we have democratic change on our side of the house. Next thing to note here is it requires a massive shift in consumer demand. That is to mean we have to now involve in plant-based diet, fossil fuels, and the ability for us to seek into alternatives. That is to mean even if electric car is here, I don't use it because it's simply not efficient, because I am not conscious that I am the one who caused the harms for other people. When I become conscious that I am the reason why certain people are suffering because of climate change, that is the point in time I am okay with opting into alternatives like electric cars and that kind of things. That's reduced emissions only benefits us. Next thing to note here is even if climate change solves as a distance in their side, we'll always have climate related impact. That is to mean some people are going to die, some people are going to suffer, droughts are going to come by, and over rainfall is going to go. That is to mean we need adaptation technologies coming in better. That only occurs when individuals recognize that there is a problem in the status quo. There are going to be climate refugees coming in from other countries to some particular countries. Why will we accept these refugees now in our side? Because we believe that it's our problem that these people are suffering. That's why we are more welcoming to them when they actually come back. They tell us that governments are more efficient and things as such. We tell you the rise of private incentives. People like Elon Musk rising on to create green energy, rising on to create electric cars is something that occurs only on our side, because individuals now recognize that's a problem to deal with, and these individuals directly are associated with this problem. That is why governments in isolation cannot pass these policies and bring changes into the environment, because they require public support for these policies to actualize in the real world. When this risk is distributed evenly among these people, there is a point in time climate becomes better for all people to live in, because even if governments make policies, it's people who have to follow them. We are incredibly proud to oppose. Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you, second opposition speaker. Let's invite the last speaker from the government side, the third government speaker. Here.
Go Pragyan. Sorry, speaker. Sorry, he's a better there. I know. Okay, populist there.
Hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think the rain crowded out a lot of the debate, but I'll summarize it for you. Our question to side opposition and all of you in this debate right now is, why doesn't these debates, these movements, these speeches, or these kinds of events materialize to broader institutional change and broader institutional solutions? The reason is simple. It's because governmental policies have been detached from environmental necessities and environmental needs. It is because government still remains in shadows and still remains irresponsible for climate change and the problems caused by climate change. Our refrain in this debate has been continued. Told you that individual action is minimalistic and individuals are somehow statistically blameless. They're victims of climate change. Because even if 250 million people in this world stop using plastic bags, it is always 25 companies that are responsible for 50% of greenhouse gas emissions. We think that the only way to hold these companies accountable is through government and through institutions. That is to say, rallies that call about the government to take actions, or people knocking at the door of the government. All of these things falls under our side of the house. We think this requires pollution permits, it requires regulations, it requires subsidies, and all of these things. They tell you that consciousness is only on their side of the house. They're the only one who know that climate change is a problem. They're the only ones who know that people understand the harms of climate change. We don't think this is true. Everyone is cognizant of the fact that climate change as a problem exists. But even if at the point where government brings about policy changes, they're likely to educate people about the kinds of changes they're making. They're likely to talk to people about the kinds of changes they're making. There's going to be large-scale public discourse. We don't think this is a problem whatsoever. We think that they saying that climate change is a future issue or issue that affects future generations is completely untrue, right? Climate change is an issue, affects us, affects people living in islands whose homes are now submerging because of rising sea levels, affects farmers whose lands are rendered ineffective because of climate change, affects people who are intoxicated air right now living in Cancer Alley. We think climate change is a problem of the present, and if we don't want it to become worse in the future, we think governmental regulations and governmental changes are key. What do we tell you from our side of the house? We say that like war, like famine, like ethnic conflict, environmental change and climate change is a problem of national security. Is a problem that addresses your lives, and humans are victim of it, because be it an absurd change of climate or be it rising sea levels, at the very end of the day, it is humans or it is individuals who are to face the brunt of climate change, who are to face the impacts of climate change. At this point, we believe that it is the government's duty to protect these peoples, bring about regulations to protect these individuals' lives, to protect their livelihood, to protect their property. We think governments and the governmental policies are what we aim for. We think at a point where we have growing individual consciousness still going on and trying to get more individual into your wings is somehow ineffective in comparison to the kinds of changes you can get through government in the status quo. Now, the bigger issue to understand right now is that climate change is an institutional issue, like unemployment, like low GDP growth. It is an institutional and global issue. For any institutional and global issue, we think that the government is the one who should come in and take account, right? We don't think people are to blame for unemployment. We don't think people are blamed for low GDP. So we think people being blamed for climate change is problematic as well. We say that it is not just shifting the blame. It is shifting the responsibility from people, from governments to people. What do we believe on under our side of the house? We think that even if democratic institutional processes takes time, we think that these are the kinds of institutionalized change we vouch for. If people like Bolsonaro, if people like Trump keep on denying the existence of climate change, if governments keep on denying the existence of climate change, some governments that we prioritize in the status quo can at one point boycott these governments, sanction these governments to the point where they acknowledge the existence of climate change. We think that getting to individuals then takes even more time, because it is not a surprise that we are the kinds of people in this room right now. We're all suited and tied up and booted in this room. You can see other people in this room, because it's only 15 to 10% of individuals who are cognizant of the fact that climate change is a problem. It's only 15 to 10% who would likely buy into your ideal that climate change exists and is a problem, because they're the only people you're appealing to right now. We think that rather than telling people you should not do something, we think telling them that you can't do something through the government is better and can create better impact in the present. Because let's face it, change can only come and change can only persist for all population when it becomes institutionalized and when it comes from the government. They say that you should not wait for your saviors, you should be a bearer of own action. But see, in an era of commercialization, people find it very difficult to distinguish between environmentally friendly and non-environmentally friendly products. We think it is naive to expect individuals to really make the right choice. Even if they do make the right choice, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think it is moral to ask them or compel them to make the right choice. We think farmers in India or people living in the islands whose houses are likely to get submerged, we think these people deserve the least whatsoever when it comes to climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this debate, we think that climate change is a problem, affects you, affects your children, affects your grandchildren, affects all your generations to come. They can't get away by shifting the burden from the ones who are meant to be protected, from the ones who ought to protect, to the ones who are meant to be protected. We think it's high time that we hold governments accountable. It is high time we call for policy changes. If you want a better environment, if you want better policies, if you want better legislations, if you want your children and grandchildren to see polar bears, I think you should vote for side proposition. Very proud to propose.
Thank you, third government speaker. Let's invite the last speaker of the debate, the third opposition speaker.
Hello? Am I audible? Hello? Hello? Ladies and gentlemen, if forests are burning, turtles are choking in plastics, and ice caps aren't recrystallizing, we need to use the scarce resources we have in forms of environmental groups efficiently. That is to say, we need to use these scarce resources that we have as environmental groups to focus on things that are most efficient, to focus on creating awareness among individuals that we are responsible for the kind of harms that we have under our side opposition. We think from side opposition we stand on changes from individuals because we also think that individuals should be responsible on protecting this planet and creating massive changes. What do we do from side opposition in this debate? Quickly summarizing our case. First, we argue that lobbying is not possible. That is to say, that lobbying in existence of already very powerful oil companies that can invest $100 million a year in lobbying against the government to for example, provide subsidy for their companies. In that instance, the environmental lobby groups that are small in nature, that are very limited in nature, cannot potentially compete against these organizations to create sustainable institutional level changes. We think even if these environmental movements get massive amount of money, they are unlikely to create massive changes because A, lobbying by nature is a tedious and long process. That is to say, if you lobby to United States government right now, Donald Trump will not adopt Green New Deal. He'll potentially sub you off, call you fake news and whatnot. But in a process where lobbying does work, it probably looks like you lobbying for 10 years to create enough of capital for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to come and become president and finally implement Green New Deal. That is to say, their deadline of 12 years is actually crossed by the time you initiate change in the United States. That is to say, under the best case scenario as well, the urgency that they show is not fulfilled from their side at all. But second, what do we do under our side collectively? This looks like Greta Thunberg getting attention in the present. Greta Thunberg was not an institution that stood for change. She was an individual like you, like me, probably a lot younger than all of us, but she got changes in society. She was able to attain maximum media attention for herself. Why did that happen? It happened because we are able to aggressively prioritize harms of climate change among individuals. That's something they have to trade off, right? Because if they are not trading that off, they can't attain enough of manpower to lobby against the governments, because that's the moment in time. If you are saying, oh, we'll do both of it, then they probably will fail in both of it because they wouldn't have enough resources to do so. But furthermore, why do we think consumer shift is much more likely under their side? They say that they will regulate these industries in order to ensure that there is no artificial demands on societies, right? But we think, first, we don't see how they are trying to achieve regulations, because under their side, it's their burden to show to us how government will now be more likely to regulate these industries in the first place, right? That is to say, in the present, they're not regulating. They need to prove to us how governments are likely to regulate or now under their side, which have not been done under their side, right? But even if we are to assume that governments somehow are able to attain those forms of changes, we think individuals being aware and individuals being conscious about harms of environmental changes, harms of climate changes, does more benefit to you. In what forms? One,
individuals can create noises. Don't underestimate individual side government, because individuals have ability to force governments to shut down, to force government to go out of their power. That is to say, in the moment in time you are able to create massive support for environmental movements. That's the moment in time you can rally climate strikes all over the world. When people will see climate strikes going on around the world, that's the moment in time government will be forced into looking at their policies. That's the moment in time government will be forced to look at their regulations. How so? Because individuals now can boycott the products. For example, we have heard a lot of talks about jigris in the present. The moment in time in Nepali individuals were boycotting jigris is the moment in time Coca-Cola will not be producing jigris anymore. That means the changes that comes from individuals are powerful and are not minimal at all.
Yeah,
but further on, we talk about important stakeholders in this debate, which they entirely ignore. Stakeholders like people who are climate refugees. That is to say, individuals who are living in Maldives whose island is completely sunk down, individuals who are probably living in the Himalayan region of Nepal who can't probably prohibit their life there anymore. That is to say, under their side, when government are forcing something into individuals are unlikely to accept them. Why so? First, populist movement that is going on all around the world, people are unlikely to accept refugees anyways, but when you're forcing refugees into these countries, it's likely that these refugees won't have good life under their side. But under our side, when we are allocating our resources to create collective consciousness among individuals, that is to say, when we are investing our money in order to create awareness, it's much more likely that people will understand and empathize that the problem of climate refugees is their fault as well, and we think that serves better. But furthermore, analyzing this idea of why individuals are at fault. First, we think individuals consume meat in a large scale. What did that do? That invited factory farming in a large scale. What does this mean? This means factory farming, deforesting in order to promote their agricultures in the United States, in Brazil, that they so care about. That means in situations where individuals are creating demands for themselves, for example, individual valuing polythene bags, even if that's banned in the status quo, is the moment in time you can blame these individuals as well, because individuals have been deforesting land even without governments encouraging it, even with active ban in it. That is to say, individuals probably are at fault as well, and we need to change their consciousness onto their side. Time's already up. Now, why do we think that the side opposition wins this debate? For three reasons, right? First, we tell you how lobbying is unlikely to work even at the best case scenario because climate change is urgent. But second and more importantly, we create democratic influence under our side. We create enough of voter bases for people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or even Bernie Sanders in the present to advocate for Green New Deal inside the parliament. We agree that governments probably can change better than the individuals. But the question is not that in this debate. The question is which side is able to create situation where government are forced to act, and that's clearly side opposition. Vote for opposition because we all are responsible for climate change, because we probably all use diesel cars and diesel bikes while coming here. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you all the debaters. I'd like to request you guys to cross floor and shake hands. And yeah, the debate is over, so let's further the proceedings.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, everyone, for such an interesting session. Now, as I said earlier, with a show of hands, can we see whose argument did you find most convincing? Now, for the government side, can we see a raise of hands? Who support the government? Literally two? Come on. Here? Government. Okay. So, how about the individuals? So I think we have a clear winner. I think both sides were equally well, but in this case, the token of love goes to the individuals. So I would like to call my colleague Bisham to kindly hand the token of love to Manish, the moderator, and also the team. Bisham, Punima Panya.
That was such a powerful debate. Thank you to the Debate Network Nepal team. I hope all of you enjoyed that and had few takeaways of it. For me, the debate reminded me of Mahabharata, where Lord Krishna once said, "Destiny is not created by the shoes we wear, but the steps we take." So let us take a few small steps to make the world a better place for us and for our future generations. Having said that, let me now welcome the next speaker, Mr. Suyam Vaidya. So, Mr. Vaidya is the CEO and co-founder of Walkman Green Coins, which is an innovative company that has a mobile platform